She mistook a millionaire CEO for her bolt, but that mistake changed everything. Rain hammered against the glass doors of the downtown hotel. Vivian Marshall stood outside, soaked to the skin, her catering uniform clinging to her. She pressed her phone to her ear, listening as her ride-share driver canceled, again. Her heart sank. She was already 20 minutes late, and her boss had warned her that one more delay meant losing her job. Across the street, a black sedan idled near the curb. The license plate started with the same letters as the one she'd seen on her app. Without thinking twice, she dashed through the rain, pulled the door open, and jumped inside. "Thank God you waited," she said, breathless. "Please, let's go. I can't be late again." The man behind the wheel glanced at her through the rearview mirror. His name was Damian Cross, CEO of one of the city's biggest companies. A man used to power, silence, and control. But tonight, he said nothing. He only started the engine. In that moment, neither of them knew this ride would change everything. What happens when a single mistake connects two people from completely different worlds? Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The car moved through the wet streets, wipers sweeping back and forth as city lights reflected off the puddles. Vivian sat in the back seat, breathing heavily, clutching her phone as if it might somehow fix her night. She didn't even notice how quiet the driver was. Damian gripped the steering wheel, watching her through the mirror. She looked exhausted, water dripping from her braids onto the leather seat, her catering uniform wrinkled and damp. There was something about her, something raw and real. Not many people spoke so openly in front of him. Usually, people measured every word, careful not to offend or sound unpolished. But this woman, she spoke like she had no time to pretend. "Sorry for the mess," Vivian said with a tired laugh. "It's been one of those weeks. My third canceled ride today. I swear if I lose this job, I might actually scream." He almost smiled. "Rough day. Rough month," she sighed. "I've been working 3 jobs just to stay ahead. Catering during the day, bartending at night, and on weekends, I help my aunt at her salon. Feels like I'm running non-stop just to keep the lights on." Her words lingered. Damian had built a life where every second was managed. Meetings, boardrooms, dinner appointments. Yet, listening to her, he realized how little he understood about the struggle that wasn't strategic or planned. "You must really love this city to keep up with all that," he said quietly. Vivian gave a short laugh. "Love. I tolerate it. Rent's insane, people are impatient, and even coffee costs a small fortune. But it's home. You get used to the noise." She leaned back, watching the rain through the window. "Sometimes I think about leaving, starting over somewhere small. But then I remember, dreams don't pay for themselves." Her tone carried no bitterness, just truth. Damian's chest tightened. For years, people around him spoke in contracts and expectations. She spoke in survival. As they drove, she continued talking, about her mother's illness years ago, about the salon that kept her family afloat, about how she still hoped to open her own event planning company one day. Something classy, you know? Real high-end stuff. Weddings, launches, the kind of events people remember for years. Damian listened, not out of politeness but out of genuine curiosity. Every word pulled him in. He didn't correct her assumption that he was her driver. Somehow, it felt good to be seen as ordinary. The traffic light turned red, and for a moment, the car filled with silence. The only sound was the soft rain tapping the roof. Damien looked at her reflection again. She had the kind of beauty that didn't need attention. It just existed, quietly demanding to be noticed. "You're really listening," she said suddenly, catching his eyes in the mirror. "Most people just nod and wait for their turn to talk." He hesitated, then replied, "Maybe what you're saying is worth listening to." Vivian smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how rare that is." He wanted to ask more, about her dreams, her fears, what made her keep fighting, but the address she'd given was coming up. As the car slowed, she gathered her bag and pulled out her phone. "How much do I owe you?" "It's covered," he said softly. She paused, surprised. "Seriously? Why?" "Because you've had enough bad luck tonight." For a moment, she looked at him, really looked. The faint streetlight from outside caught her face, and her smile appeared, tired but genuine. "You're one of the good ones," she said. She stepped out into the rain, pulling her hood up as she hurried toward her building. Damien watched her go, the door closing behind her, leaving the faint scent of rain and cheap perfume. He should have driven away, but he didn't. His fingers tightened on the steering wheel. That small encounter shouldn't have mattered. It was a simple mistake, nothing more. But something about her voice, her eyes, the way she carried herself despite the weight of her life, stayed with him. When he finally pulled away from the curb, he couldn't shake the thought that maybe this wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of something he didn't understand yet. He didn't know her name then, but he would. He intended to find out. Days passed, but Damien couldn't stop thinking about her. The sound of her voice replayed in his mind during meetings, the memory of her tired smile slipping into his thoughts when he should have been focused on quarterly reports. It didn't make sense. He had met countless people, investors, models, executives, but none of them stayed with him like Vivian Marshall, the woman who had mistaken him for a driver. He searched her name through company databases, tracing it back to the catering service she had mentioned. It wasn't difficult for a man like him to find out where she worked. What surprised him was how quickly he found excuses to cross her path. One morning, he walked into a small corner coffee shop in Midtown, her favorite, as he'd learned, and ordered black coffee, sitting by the window. A few minutes later, she came in, rushing as always, her apron tied around her waist, her braids pulled back neatly. When she spotted him, her eyes lit up. "Hey, driver guy," she said, laughing. He smiled, pretending to be surprised. "Vivian, right? What are the odds?" "Guess the city's smaller than it feels," she said, ordering her usual and sliding into the seat across from him. "You live around here?" "Not far," he lied. "I work in consulting. Flexible hours." She nodded, impressed. Must be nice to have that kind of balance. They talked until her shift started, about the weather, the noise of the city, and the kind of peace that seemed impossible to find. It was simple, effortless, and honest, at least, from her side. From that day, the coincidences multiplied. He showed up at the bar where she worked 3 nights a week, always sitting in the same corner, always asking for her section. He listened to her stories about difficult customers, about exhaustion, about hope. She teased him about his calmness. "You sit there like nothing bothers you," she said one night, sliding him a glass. "Either you're secretly a monk or just really good at pretending." He chuckled. "Maybe I've learned not to stress over things I can't control." "Well, teach me that trick," she said, leaning on the counter. "Because I spend most of my time stressing." They laughed together, and for a moment, he forgot the lie that held them apart. As the weeks passed, Vivian started opening up more. She told him about the salon she helped run on weekends, about the events she'd love to plan if she ever had the money to start her own company. Her eyes came alive when she talked about colors, designs, and music, the kind of details that made an event memorable. Damien found himself wanting to make those dreams real for her, but he couldn't reveal who he was. Not yet. Not when she trusted him because she thought he was just like her. Their connection deepened in small ways. Shared coffee breaks, long walks after her shifts, laughter over cheap takeout. Sometimes they said nothing at all, just walked through the city while the noise of cars and street vendors filled the silence. One night, after closing the bar, they walked side by side through Central Park. The city lights reflected in puddles along the path. Vivian's voice was soft when she said, "You ever feel like life's passing you by? Like you're doing everything you can, but it's never enough?" He looked at her for a moment before answering. "Every day." She stopped walking, surprised by the honesty in his tone. "You don't seem like the type." "Maybe I'm just good at hiding it," he said. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Vivian smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're different from most guys I meet." "How so?" "You actually listen," she said. "You don't try to fix things or tell me what I should do. You just let me be." Damien's chest tightened. He wanted to tell her everything, that he wasn't who she thought, that his life was built on the kind of privilege she worked 3 jobs to survive. But the words stuck in his throat. "Instead," he said softly, "maybe I just like hearing you talk." She laughed, bumping his shoulder. "Careful, or I might start thinking you actually care." "Maybe I do." They stopped under a street lamp. The light reflected off the wet pavement, and for a moment, the rest of the world disappeared. He reached out, brushing his thumb gently across her cheek. She didn't pull away. When he kissed her, it wasn't planned or rushed. It was quiet, honest, and warm, the kind of kiss that felt like truth, even if it wasn't. When they parted, she whispered, "I didn't see that coming." "Neither did I," he admitted. As they walked away, Damien's thoughts turned heavy. He had built his world on precision and control, but this was chaos wrapped in something beautiful. Every moment with her made it harder to hide who he really was. But he couldn't stop now. He didn't want to. Because with Vivian, for the first time in years, Damien Cross didn't feel like a CEO. He just felt human. Vivian's week began with a kind of joy she hadn't felt in years. Her catering company, still new and struggling, had just been hired for a massive corporate event. One hosted by Cross Industries, one of the most influential companies in New York. It was the kind of opportunity that could change everything. When she met Damien later that evening at their usual coffee spot, she could barely keep still. "You're not going to believe this," she said, eyes shining. "We got the Cross Industries gala. It's huge. Their CEO is practically a legend. They say he runs half the city's deals from his penthouse office." Damien froze for a heartbeat, then forced a smile. "That's incredible, Viv. You deserve it." She grinned, unaware of the storm behind his calm tone. "I'm terrified, though. I can't mess this up. If we impress them, it could mean contracts, investors, everything we've been working for." "That's great," he managed, though the air felt thinner. "When is it?" "This Friday," she said. "It's black tie, super fancy. We'll be catering, not attending, obviously. But just being in that room," she exhaled, beaming. "It feels like a step forward, you know?" He nodded, but his mind raced. Friday. That was the night of the annual Cross Industries Gala, the company's biggest event of the year, one he was expected to host. Every board member, journalist, and investor would be there. There was no way to hide. For the next few days, Damien found himself torn between 2 worlds colliding in slow motion. His staff finalized seating charts and security briefings while his thoughts drifted to Vivian's laughter, her plans, her innocence in all this. Every time she texted him about menu options or catering jitters, his chest tightened. He couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth. By the night of the gala, the city glowed with its usual grandeur. Luxury cars lined the entrance of the Cross Industries Tower, cameras flashing as guests in designer gowns stepped out into the shimmering lobby. Inside, chandeliers threw soft light over glass walls and marble floors. Everything gleamed, the kind of perfection Damien had built his empire on. Behind the scenes, Vivian adjusted trays and directed her small team with focus and pride. Her uniform was simple: crisp white shirt, black vest, hair tied neatly beneath a cap. She looked around at the gold accents, the soft music, the wealthy crowd swirling like they belonged to another planet. She smiled quietly to herself. "One day," she murmured, "I'll be planning the event, not serving it." When Damien arrived, every camera turned toward him. The photographers called his name, flashes bursting. He played his role flawlessly, confident, composed, the image of success. But his pulse was uneven. He caught glimpses of staff moving between tables, silver trays gliding through the crowd, and with every passing minute, his fear grew. Then he saw her. Vivian stood near the bar, arranging glasses, her movements graceful and efficient. She hadn't noticed him yet. The sight of her in this world, his world, was a punch to the gut. She looked radiant even in uniform, her expression focused, unaware that the man she trusted was the one signing the checks for the night. He turned away quickly, pretending to greet a guest, but his composure cracked with each second. He needed to find a way to speak to her, to explain before she found out on her own. But time was running out. As the orchestra softened and the room quieted, the event host stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man announced, voice echoing through the grand hall, "please welcome our keynote speaker, the visionary behind tonight's success, the CEO of Cross Industries, Mr. Damien Cross." The words hit the air like glass breaking. Vivian froze mid-step. Her eyes lifted to the stage, confusion crossing her face, then disbelief. Damien walked forward under the lights, expression steady, though his stomach dropped when he saw her in the crowd. Her tray slipped. Crystal glasses shattered across the marble floor. The sound silenced the room. For a long moment, no one moved. Vivian stood there, breath shaking, staring at the man she thought she knew. Damien hesitated on stage, words catching in his throat as their eyes met. Her shock turned to anger, and then something deeper: hurt. The kind that comes when the foundation of trust collapses beneath your feet. A manager rushed over, whispering urgently, but Vivian barely heard him. Damien finished his speech mechanically, his voice steady but empty. Every applause that followed felt like static in his ears. Afterward, he tried to find her, slipping away from the cluster of reporters and executives, moving through the service hallway behind the banquet area. He caught sight of her near the loading dock, wrapping up leftovers, hands trembling as she avoided everyone's gaze. "Vivian!" She looked up, eyes sharp with disbelief. "Don't! Please, just let me explain." "Explain what?" she cut in, her voice cracking. "That you've been lying to me since the day we met? That you let me think you were one of us while living in a world I can barely survive in?" He stepped closer, guilt heavy in his chest. "I didn't plan this. I just didn't plan to tell me," she said, bitterness rising. "You had 100 chances, Damien. 100. Her hands clenched the edge of the counter. "Do you have any idea how stupid I feel? I talked to you like you were real. I told you things I don't tell anyone. And all this time you were—" She shook her head. "You were just watching." "Vivian, it wasn't like that." She let out a breath that sounded like defeat. "Of course it was. Guys like you don't understand what it means to be honest when you can buy your way out of everything." She turned and walked out before he could answer. Back in the ballroom, the music had resumed, the clinking of glasses hiding the echo of her words. Damien stood alone in the quiet corridor, the echo of her voice still sharp in his mind. For the first time in years, he didn't feel powerful. He just felt small. Backstage, the noise from the ballroom faded into a low hum. Vivian stood by the service exit, arms folded, her uniform damp from spilled champagne and tears she refused to let fall. Damien caught up to her, his voice breaking the silence. "Vivian, please. Just listen." She turned sharply. "Don't. You don't get to talk right now." He stopped, the distance between them heavy with everything unsaid. "I wanted to tell you. Every time we met, I tried, but—" She laughed bitterly. "You tried. You had months. Damien, do you even know what tonight was for me? My company's biggest job. I worked for weeks just to afford the supplies, just to be taken seriously. And then," she gestured toward the ballroom, "you walk on stage, and the man I thought I knew turns into him. The billionaire everyone whispers about." "Vivian." "No," her voice cracked. "You let me bare my soul while you hid behind a lie. You sat there, listening to me talk about struggling to pay rent, about losing sleep, about wanting something better, and you knew you could fix all of it with a single phone call." He flinched. "That's not what this was about." "Then what was it about?" "Curiosity. Guilt. Some rich man's fantasy about a real life." "Stop," he said softly. "You think that's all I see you as?" Her silence told him enough. "Vivian, you made me feel—" He stopped himself, breath uneven. "You made me remember who I was before all of this. I didn't want to lose that. I didn't want to lose you." Her eyes glistened, but her tone stayed sharp. "You lost me the moment you lied." For a long moment, neither spoke. The muffled sounds of the gala carried through the walls. Laughter, applause, music. Two different worlds, divided by truth. When she finally turned to leave, Damien didn't stop her. He just watched as she disappeared through the service door into the rainy night. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Mystery woman in Damien Cross scandal? CEO's secret relationship with caterer stuns guests. From the kitchen to the penthouse, who is Vivian Marshall? Headlines sprawled across every gossip site. Photos of her outside the hotel, soaked in rain, were plastered next to glossy images of Damien in tailored suits. The internet tore her apart, some calling her a gold digger, others a victim. Her phone buzzed non-stop, but none of the messages were kind. Her catering company's inbox filled with cancellations. Clients backed out to avoid attention. The people who used to greet her with smiles now whispered when she entered the room. She deleted her social media, shut off her phone, and avoided the news. But the damage had already been done. Damien, meanwhile, watched it all unfold from the top floor of his glass penthouse. Every headline, every cruel comment cut deeper than he expected. His PR team urged him to release a statement denying the relationship, but he refused. He couldn't pretend she didn't matter. He sent flowers, they came back. He called, her number was disconnected. He waited outside her apartment once, but she never came home. Days turned to weeks. The silence between them grew unbearable. Finally, one afternoon, Damien stood across the street from the building where she lived, an aging structure tucked between newer towers. His assistant had told him she was behind on rent, so he'd quietly bought the property through a trust, planning to give her time, protection, stability. But when he arrived, movers were already outside. Vivian stood by a small pile of boxes, wearing a faded hoodie and jeans. Her eyes were tired but calm. When she noticed him, her expression hardened. "Please don't," she said before he could speak. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay." "I'm not your project, Damien." He swallowed hard. That's not what this is. You bought my building, she said flatly. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? He hesitated. I was trying to help. You were trying to control it, she said. Control me. That's what you do, isn't it? You buy problems until they disappear. He stepped closer, voice low. I didn't buy you. I just didn't want you to suffer because of me. I already am, she whispered. The rain began to fall again, soft and steady. She looked up at him for the last time, the man she'd once trusted, now a stranger wrapped in good intentions. Goodbye, Damien. She walked away without looking back, carrying one box at a time into a waiting taxi. He stood there long after the car pulled off, his reflection blurring in the wet pavement. That night, his penthouse felt colder than ever. The city glittered outside his window, but none of it mattered. The silence pressed against him until it became unbearable. For years, Damien Cross had built walls out of glass and power, believing they would protect him. But now, all that wealth had bought him nothing but emptiness. He'd lost the only person who ever saw him, not the CEO, not the brand, but the man beneath it all. And this time, there was no one left to lie to. Weeks turned into a quiet ache. The city went on, cars honking, people rushing, but for Damien Cross, everything had slowed to a crawl. His days were mechanical. Meetings blurred. Deals closed without meaning. At night, he replayed the same scene, Vivian's eyes hard with betrayal, her voice trembling with hurt. No amount of wealth or influence could silence that memory. For the first time in years, Damien felt powerless. He had spent a lifetime building an empire by fixing problems with logic and money. But this wasn't a problem he could buy away. This was guilt, raw and human, and it demanded something more than apology. He stopped attending galas, canceled interviews, and stayed away from the noise of his world. Instead, he began to think about hers. The late nights she spent juggling shifts. The way her voice softened when she spoke about her aunt's small salon. The spark in her eyes when she described her dream, her own event company. One evening, he found himself outside that same salon in the Bronx. The lights were still on, the faint buzz of a hairdryer humming through the window. He didn't go in at first. He just watched. The place was modest, a few customers chatting, laughter spilling into the street. It was the kind of warmth he hadn't felt in years. When her aunt, a sturdy woman with kind eyes, finally stepped outside to close up, Damien approached quietly. "Mrs. Harris?" She turned, surprised. "Do I know you?" "Not personally," he admitted. "I'm Damien Cross." Her expression shifted, wary, but curious. "You're the one who hurt my niece." He nodded. "Yes. And I'm not here to defend myself. I just need your help." She crossed her arms. "You think helping her means showing up here after all that happened?" "No," he said gently. "I think helping her means giving her what she's always wanted, on her terms. I don't want her to ever think she owes me anything. I just want her to have the chance she's earned 100 times over." Her eyes softened slightly. "And you think money will fix this?" He shook his head. "Not money. Opportunity." For a long time, she studied him, searching his face for a trace of pride or manipulation. What she saw instead was a man stripped of everything but sincerity. Finally, she said, "If you really mean that, I might know how to reach her." 2 weeks later, Vivian received a letter. Not an email, not a text, but a letter tucked under her new apartment door. The envelope was cream-colored, embossed with her name in silver ink, Vivian Marshall. Inside was an elegant card. No branding, no signature. Just an address in Manhattan and a simple note. "You once said dreams deserve a space to breathe. This one's yours. DC." Her first instinct was anger. She nearly tore it up. But curiosity, slow and reluctant, won. A few days later, she stood outside a modern glass building on 52nd Street. The sign above the door stopped her cold. Marshall Events. Her name. Her dream. Heart pounding, she stepped inside. The space was bright and open, filled with soft natural light and clean lines. There were office desks arranged neatly, an elegant conference room with a long oak table, and a small event stage by the window overlooking the city skyline. She walked through the space slowly, fingertips brushing across polished surfaces. The walls were painted the same shade of warm ivory she had once described during a late-night conversation with Damien. The chairs, the lighting, even the computer systems, everything mirrored what she had imagined during those exhausted subway rides home months ago. It was overwhelming. She found a small note on the desk, resting beside a set of keys. No debts. No conditions. Only belief. D. Her chest tightened. For a long moment, she just stood there, surrounded by the physical proof of her words being heard, truly heard. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. This couldn't erase what he'd done. But it meant something. Vivian sank into one of the office chairs and exhaled deeply. For months, she had hated him for his lies, for pretending to be one of her people while sitting atop a fortune. But this gesture wasn't about wealth or guilt. It felt like something else. A quiet acknowledgement of her worth. Still, she couldn't decide if it was forgiveness or goodbye. She stayed there for nearly an hour, taking in every corner, every piece of furniture that echoed a memory. It was too specific to be coincidence. Damien had listened to her, truly listened, even when she thought he was just another passenger in her story. When she finally rose to leave, her reflection caught in the glass wall. Confident, capable, but uncertain. That's when she heard footsteps behind her. A familiar voice, low and hesitant. Vivian. Her body froze. She turned slowly. And there he was, standing in the doorway, no security, no suit, just a plain gray shirt and dark jeans. The man who had broken her heart and, somehow, built her dream. His expression was soft, almost fragile. "I didn't want to surprise you," he said quietly. "But I had to see you walk in here. You belong in this space." Vivian didn't move. Her heart raced, caught between anger and something she couldn't yet name. He took a careful step forward. "I can't erase what I did. But I can prove that every word I said about believing in you was real." She looked around the room once more, her dream, his creation. And for the first time in months, she wasn't sure whether to walk away or listen. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet in the new office felt heavier than words could carry. Damien stood by the entrance, watching Vivian, unsure if he even had the right to be there. She kept her back to him, one hand resting on the smooth desk he'd built from her dreams. When she finally turned, her expression was guarded. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," he said softly. "But I had to see you. I had to tell you this face to face." Her jaw tightened. "You've already said enough." He took a slow step forward, hands at his sides. No confidence, no corporate posture, just a man stripped bare. "I can't erase the lie," he began, voice low and steady. "But I can prove I meant every word I said to you." Vivian laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "Prove it. You've already proven plenty, Damien. You proved how easy it was for you to play pretend. How easily you could make me trust you while living in a completely different world." "I never meant to hurt you," he said quickly. "The moment you got into my car, I should have told you the truth. But when you talked, I didn't want it to end. I wanted to be someone you could talk to without the walls, without the name." Her eyes narrowed. "So you let me talk while you hid behind silence?" Do you know what it's like to open up about your struggles to someone you think understands, only to find out he could buy and sell your entire life? His shoulders dropped. Every day since that night, I've replayed that moment. You don't know how many times I almost told you, but I was afraid, not of losing you, but of seeing the look you're giving me right now. For a long second, neither moved. The city hummed faintly beyond the windows, sunlight spilling across the room, a quiet reminder that life went on, even when hearts didn't. Vivian crossed her arms. You think this, she gestured around the office, makes things right? He shook his head. No, it's not about making things right. It's about giving back what you should have had all along. You told me about this dream, about wanting to build something that mattered. I couldn't stand the thought that my mistake might keep you from it. Her eyes glistened. If I accept this, people will say you bought me. Let them. His answer came fast, sincere. We know the truth. She stared at him, trying to read the man in front of her. He looked nothing like the confident CEO from the gala stage. His hair was slightly unkempt, his shirt plain, and the arrogance she once assumed he carried everywhere was gone. I don't care what people say anymore, he continued. They'll always have something to say, about you, about me. But I can't keep living my life for them. The only thing that matters to me now is being honest, even if that honesty costs me everything. Her breath caught. You don't get to say that like it's simple. You live in a world where you can lose everything and still wake up in luxury. I lose one job, one rumor spreads, and my life falls apart. He nodded slowly. You're right. You've had to fight for every inch. And I'll never pretend to understand that kind of struggle. But that's exactly why I admired you. You kept showing up. You didn't wait for someone to save you. She looked away, voice trembling. You shouldn't have followed me into my world. You didn't belong there. I know, he said softly. But I wanted to. For once in my life, I wanted to be where things were real, where someone looked at me and didn't see a name on a magazine cover. He took another step closer, his voice almost breaking. You made me feel human again. Vivian closed her eyes for a second, fighting back tears she didn't want him to see. The sound of his voice, the raw honesty in it, pulled at something deep inside her. Memories flooded back, his laugh in the park, his quiet attention when she spoke, the way he never interrupted her even when she rambled about her dreams. She opened her eyes. You know what hurts the most? I didn't fall for the CEO. I fell for the man who I thought took the subway to work and drank cheap coffee because he liked the taste. I fell for someone who wasn't real. He nodded slowly. Maybe the name, the company, the money, maybe that was the lie. But the man you fell for, that was me. The one who listened. The one who cared. Her hands trembled slightly. You made me believe I mattered to you. You did, he said simply. You still do. A tear escaped down her cheek. She brushed it away quickly, not wanting him to see the crack in her armor. Damien hesitated, then said quietly, You don't have to forgive me. You don't even have to like me. But I couldn't walk away without showing you what you're capable of. This company isn't mine, Vivian. It's yours. Every idea in this place came from you. She looked around again, at the desks, the lighting, the window view she once described during a rainy cab ride. The reality of it pressed against her chest. Her voice softened. You really remembered all of it? He nodded. Every word. Silence stretched between them, not angry this time, just heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, she sighed. I don't know what to do with all of this. You don't have to decide now, he said. Just know that I meant what I said from the start. I believe in you. Even if I'm not part of your life, I wanted you to have the future you deserve. She looked at him for a long moment, at the man who had hurt her, but who was now standing before her stripped of ego, offering nothing but truth. The walls she had built around her heart began to shift, not fall, but move, just enough for something like forgiveness to breathe. "Damien," she said quietly, "I'm still angry." He nodded. "You should be. But I see what you did here. And part of me—" She stopped, exhaling deeply. "Part of me remembers the man I talked to in that car, the one who listened like my words mattered." He smiled faintly. "That's the only version of me I want you to remember." For the first time in months, their eyes met, not as CEO and employee, not as deceiver and betrayed, but as two flawed people trying to find their way back to honesty. The silence between them no longer felt painful. It felt like a beginning. Morning light spilled across the office windows, washing the space in a soft gold hue. Vivian stood alone, turning slowly, her fingertips grazing the polished surface of the conference table. The air smelled faintly of new furniture and fresh paint, that quiet, unfamiliar scent of beginnings. Every detail seemed impossibly personal. The soft gray of the chairs, the plants by the window, the simple framed quotes about creativity and perseverance. Even the coffee machine, the exact brand she used to save up for but never bought, sat quietly on the counter, humming in standby. She moved closer to the window. From here, the city stretched beneath her, the skyline jagged and alive, the noise of traffic faint but constant. Somewhere down there, months ago, she'd walked to catering gigs with aching feet and the weight of rent bills pressing on her chest. Now, she was standing in a place that had once existed only in late-night conversations with a man she thought was ordinary. For the first time since the scandal, she allowed herself to breathe without defense. She sat at the desk, her desk, and opened the first drawer. Inside was a small black notebook. Her handwriting filled the pages, every note, every sketch, every dream she'd written down when life felt impossible. The realization hit her. Damien hadn't just listened. He'd remembered. Tears pricked her eyes. She whispered, "You really did listen." Her phone buzzed softly. A message. "Damien, I'll be downstairs if you want to talk. No pressure." She hesitated for a long moment before replying. "Vivian, come up." A few minutes later, the elevator doors opened, and he stepped in quietly. No suit jacket this time. No expensive cologne. Just a man in a simple white shirt, holding his breath like he was afraid to disturb the air around her. "You came," she said softly, without turning from the window. "I said I'd be here if you wanted me to be," he replied. Silence lingered, not tense, but thoughtful. She turned finally, her gaze steady. "You remembered everything." He nodded. "Every detail mattered to you. That made it matter to me." She leaned against the desk, arms crossed but her tone softer than before. "I kept thinking you did this out of guilt. That this was your way of fixing the mess." "It's not about fixing," he said. "It's about believing in what you built, what you deserve. I didn't buy you a dream, Vivian. You already had it. I just cleared the path." She studied him quietly, searching for any hint of the man who once hid behind a lie. But he looked different now. Not weaker, just human. "This place," she said, glancing around. "It feels like me. Not your version of me, just me." "That's all I wanted," he said. Vivian exhaled slowly. "You know, I spent weeks trying to hate you. I told myself you used me, that you were another rich man trying to feel better about himself. But somewhere deep down, I knew there was something real in the way you looked at me, something that didn't care about the lie, even when it should have." He stepped closer, careful not to bridge the distance too fast. "It was real. Every word, every laugh, every quiet moment. I didn't fake any of it. I just started it wrong." Her eyes shimmered, not with anger this time, but with quiet recognition. She reached for the notebook again, flipping through the pages. You made all of this happen. But I don't want this to be charity, Damien. He shook his head. It's not charity. It's a partnership. You once told me that real success is sharing it with the people who believed in you when no one else did. You believed in me before you even knew who I was. She smiled faintly. That was your fault. You made it easy. He smiled too, but it was small, cautious. No more lies, he said quietly. Vivian met his eyes. Ever. Even when it hurts. He nodded. Even then. The air between them seemed to shift. Lighter, yet fragile, like glass finally mended but still bearing the faint lines of where it cracked. She walked toward him, stopping just close enough to feel the warmth of his presence. I don't know if I'm ready to trust you again, she admitted. I'll wait, he said simply. For as long as it takes. That kind of patience, quiet, grounded, unspoken, felt more honest than any grand apology ever could. They stood there for a while, watching the city below, the noise muffled by the glass. In that silence, Vivian realized something. This wasn't about forgiveness or romance, not yet. It was about truth. About two people trying, despite everything, to meet in the middle of who they really were. She finally turned toward him, voice softer. You know what the hardest part was? He shook his head. Missing the person I thought you were, before I realized you were still that person, just hidden. His throat tightened. Then maybe it's time you see the whole of me. She nodded slowly. We start from honesty. From here. He extended his hand, not as a plea, not as an assumption, but as an invitation. After a long pause, she took it. No music swelled. No dramatic declarations. Just the simple touch of two people standing in a place built from truth. Vivian smiled faintly. You really think this can work? He looked at her, the woman who had once challenged him to see beyond his world. I think it already is. The light shifted again, catching on the glass walls, reflecting both their faces, two silhouettes framed by the city that had once separated them. For the first time, neither one was pretending. It wasn't a grand ending. It was the beginning of something fragile, grounded, and painfully real. The hum of the city filled the background as Damien and Vivian stood in the middle of her new office, a space that once symbolized distance now carrying quiet promise. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply stood there, the air between them steady, real. Vivian looked down at his extended hand. Then, with a soft breath, she took it. Her grip was firm, her voice clear. Hi, she said, almost smiling. I'm Vivian Marshall. I think we should start over. Damien's lips curved into the kind of smile that came from deep relief. Hi, he replied, shaking her hand gently. I'm Damien Cross, and I'm the luckiest man alive. She laughed, not forced, not uncertain, just light, genuine laughter that filled the room. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was standing in the shadow of his world. This moment belonged to both of them. Weeks passed, and Marshall Events came alive. The once empty office turned into a hive of energy, designers sketching plans, assistants on phone calls, clients streaming in with ideas. Vivian led every meeting with confidence, her passion contagious. Her name began to circulate through the city, not as a scandal, but as a story of perseverance. Damien watched from a respectful distance. He came by sometimes, not as the man who built the company for her, but as someone proud to witness what she'd built herself. When she needed advice, he offered it. When she didn't, he stayed silent and watched her lead. At one of her first major launches, the hall buzzed with guests. String lights shimmered above the tables, and laughter carried through the crowd. Vivian moved through the event with ease. Professional, composed, radiant. Across the room, Damien stood near the exit, blending in among the guests. He didn't draw attention, didn't make a scene. He was simply there, watching her shine. Their eyes met for a second, and he gave a small nod. Quiet pride, nothing more. She returned it with a faint smile before turning back to her clients. Later that night, as the last of the guests left and her team packed up, she walked outside to find Damien leaning casually against his car. "You didn't have to stay," she said. "I wanted to," he replied. "Besides, I didn't want to miss your first big night." She smiled. "It went well. It went perfectly," he said. "You were incredible." Vivian folded her arms, half teasing. "You're biased." "Completely," he admitted with a grin. "But that doesn't make me wrong." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the city around them. Taxis rushing by, laughter from a nearby restaurant, the steady rhythm of New York life moving on. "So," she said quietly, "what happens now?" He thought for a moment. "We build. Slowly. Honestly. No lies, no titles, just us." She nodded, eyes steady. "I can live with that." He smiled. "Good. Because I don't plan on going anywhere." Vivian stepped closer, the streetlight reflecting softly on her skin. "You know," she said, "if someone told me that night outside the hotel would lead here, I'd have called them crazy." "I probably would have agreed," he said with a laugh. "But I'm glad we were both wrong." Their laughter faded into a quiet that didn't need filling. Damien reached out, tucking one damp braid behind her ear, his hand lingering just for a second. "No more lies," he murmured. She nodded. "No more lies." The moment was simple. No grand declarations, no promises of forever. Just two people standing in the aftermath of chaos, choosing to start again, slowly and truthfully. Vivian leading a team meeting, her voice confident, clients nodding in admiration. Damien in a quiet corner at another of her events, not as the focus but as quiet support. The two of them sharing coffee in a small cafe. No cameras, no attention, just conversation. Late evenings spent in laughter and planning, their connection grounded in shared respect. A newspaper headline months later, Marshall Events lands city's biggest corporate contract. Vivian folds the paper, smiling. Damien watches from the other side of the table, proud. Their story didn't become a fairy tale. It became something better, real, imperfect, honest. As they walked side by side through the city one evening, she glanced at him and said softly, "You know what I realized?" "What's that?" "The best love stories don't start with perfection," she said. "They start with truth." He reached for her hand, and this time, she didn't hesitate. The best love stories don't start with perfection. They start with truth. Sometimes, it takes losing everything to find what's real. And when two people choose honesty over comfort, that's when love begins to last. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and tell us where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like No More Lies to your screen. And trust me, tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss.